The music was loud, and the night was alive with flashing lights. Zena felt excited as she held her boyfriend, Tun's hand, walking into the party. Everyone looked so cool, dressed in bright outfits, laughing and dancing. But something didn't feel right. The room felt hot, almost like it was closing in. Suddenly, a loud argument broke out near the back, and she saw Tund exchange a quick, nervous look with another boy. "Stay here," he whispered before disappearing into the crowd. Minutes later, there was a loud bang, and people screamed. Zena froze in fear. Hey, viewers! Before we continue this gripping story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. You don't want to miss stories like this one, where real lessons come alive. Now, let's dive back into Zena's night at the party. Zena was a 17-year-old girl with big dreams. She loved singing and hoped to join a music competition someday. One evening, her boyfriend, Tund, invited her to a party. Tund was popular in their neighborhood and always knew the latest trends. "It will be fun, Zena," he said with his charming smile. At first, Zena hesitated. Her mother didn't like her staying out late, but Tund promised, "I'll bring you home safely." Trusting him, Zena agreed. That evening, Zena wore her favorite yellow dress and braided her hair neatly. Tund arrived looking sharp in his blue jeans and white shirt. He carried himself with confidence, and Zena couldn't help but feel proud walking beside him. As they left, Zena's mother called out, "Be careful, my daughter. The night holds secrets." Zena laughed, thinking her mother was just being overprotective. The party was held in an unfinished house at the edge of the neighborhood. The walls were bare, and the floors were dusty, but the organizers had decorated the place with colorful lights. Zena was amazed by the loud music, the people dancing, and the smell of grilled meat. It was her first real party, and she felt grown up. As they walked in, Tund greeted his friends, who were all older boys. They gave him fist bumps and looked at Zena with interest. "This your babe?" one of them asked with a sly grin. Tund laughed and nodded. Zena felt shy but smiled politely. She didn't know these boys well, but she trusted Tund to keep her safe. At first, the party was fun. Zena and Tund danced together, and she loved how free she felt, swaying to the music. Someone handed her a drink, and she hesitated. "It's just juice," Tund said, winking at her. She sipped it slowly, but the taste was bitter and strange. She decided not to finish it. As the night went on, Zena noticed that Tund kept stepping away to talk to people. Sometimes, they spoke in low voices, glancing around nervously. When she asked him what was going on, he smiled and said, "Don't worry about it. Just enjoy yourself." But Zena couldn't shake the uneasy feeling building in her chest. Around midnight, the music stopped suddenly, and everyone turned to look at the back of the room. Two boys were arguing loudly, their voices angry and sharp. Tund was standing nearby, trying to calm them down. Zena felt her heart race as she saw one of the boys pull something shiny from his pocket. It was a knife. "Stay here," Tund told her, his face serious. Zena didn't know what to do. She wanted to follow him, but her legs felt heavy. The room grew tense, and people started whispering. Some moved closer to see what was happening, while others backed away, sensing danger. Suddenly, there was a loud bang. It wasn't the sound of a knife, it was a gunshot. People screamed and ran in all directions. Zena ducked behind a table, her hands trembling. She tried to see where Tund was, but couldn't find him in the chaos. The room filled with smoke, and her chest tightened with fear. The sound of police sirens echoed in the distance. Someone must have called them. Zena felt a hand grab her arm, and she jumped, ready to scream. But it was Tund. "We have to go, now," he shouted, pulling her towards the back door. Outside, the air was cold and still. Tund led Zena through narrow alleys, his grip tight on her wrist. "What happened?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Don't ask questions," he replied, looking over his shoulder. Zena's mind raced. She trusted Tund, but something about his behavior scared her. When they finally stopped, Zena saw that they were behind an old warehouse. Tun's friends were there, talking in hushed voices. One of them was bleeding from his arm. Zena realized with horror that they had been involved in whatever happened at the party. She stepped back, her heart pounding. Zena's legs felt weak as she leaned against the wall of the warehouse. The night's events were spinning in her mind. She looked at Tund, who was pacing back and forth, talking to his friends in low tones. "Tund," she called softly, her voice trembling, "what's going on? Who got hurt?" Tund avoided her eyes and said, "It's nothing, Zena. Just stay quiet, and I'll explain later." Zena wasn't convinced. She could see the fear in his eyes and the blood on one of the boy's shirts. The injured boy winced as another tried to wrap his arm with a cloth. Zena wanted to run, but they were in the middle of nowhere. Her heart ached with regret for coming to the party. She thought of her mother's warning and wished she'd listened. Suddenly, the sound of police sirens grew louder, cutting through the night. The boys panicked, scattering in different directions. "Zena, come with me," Tund shouted, grabbing her hand. But Zena hesitated. She didn't want to get involved in whatever trouble they were in. "I can't, Tund," she said, pulling her hand away. "I need to go home." Tund looked at her, his face full of desperation. "If you stay here, the police will find you. They won't believe you had nothing to do with this," he said. Zena's mind raced. She felt trapped between staying with Tund and facing the unknown consequences, or running and risking everything on her own. Zena made a split-second decision to run. She turned and bolted towards the street, ignoring Tund's shouts behind her. Her bare feet slapped against the cold pavement as she sprinted through the quiet neighborhood. She didn't know where she was going, but she had to get away from the chaos. The sirens were closer now, and flashing blue and red lights lit up the dark streets. Zena ducked behind a parked car, trying to catch her breath. Her chest heaved, and her heart pounded like a drum. She prayed silently, asking for protection and a way out of this nightmare. As Zena peeked from behind the car, she saw a police van stop near the warehouse. Officers got out, shouting commands as they approached the building. Zena felt a pang of guilt for leaving Tund behind, but she reminded herself that she had no part in what happened. Her only goal now was to get home safely. She crept along the shadows, careful not to make any noise. Her yellow dress, once her favorite, was now dusty and torn from running through the rough streets. She thought about her mother's worried face and felt tears sting her eyes. "Please, let me get home," she whispered to herself. After what felt like hours, Zena finally recognized a familiar street. Relief washed over her as she saw the small shop near her house. But just as she was about to cross the road, a car pulled up beside her. The windows rolled down, and to her shock, Tund was in the passenger seat. "Get in, Zena," he said urgently. Zena froze, her instinct screaming at her to run. The driver, one of Tund's older friends, glared at her. "You can't stay out here," Tund said, his voice softer. "The police are looking for everyone who was at the party." Zena hesitated, her fear battling with her trust in Tund. Against her better judgment, Zena climbed into the car. The ride was tense and silent. Tund kept looking out the window, and the driver gripped the wheel tightly, his jaw clenched. "Where are we going?" Zena asked quietly. Tund didn't answer. Instead, the driver muttered, "We just need to lay low for a while." Zena's stomach churned. She didn't like the sound of that. She felt trapped, sitting between two people she didn't fully trust. The car sped through empty streets, and Zena's heart sank as they moved farther from her neighborhood. She realized she might have made a terrible mistake. Zena sat silently in the back seat, clutching her torn dress as the car sped through the quiet streets. Her mind raced, replaying everything that had happened. The sound of the party, the shouts, and the panic all felt like a terrible dream. "Where are we going?" she asked again, her voice shaky. Tund finally turned to her, his face filled with worry. "Zena, just trust me," he said, but his tone didn't feel convincing. The driver shot Tund an angry glance. You brought her into this mess. She better not talk to anyone, he snapped. Zena's heart sank. She realized she was in much deeper trouble than she thought. The car eventually pulled into a secluded area surrounded by tall trees. The driver killed the engine and stepped out, motioning for them to follow. Zena hesitated but reluctantly got out of the car. The air was cold, and the night felt darker than ever. Why are we here? She asked, her voice trembling. The driver ignored her, walking ahead toward a small, abandoned building. Tund stayed close to Zena, whispering, we need to hide until things cool down. Zena shook her head. I didn't do anything. I just want to go home, she cried. Tund grabbed her arm gently. Zena, please. If you leave now, they'll think you're part of it. Inside the abandoned building, Zena sat on a dusty floor while Tund and the driver talked in hushed tones. She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling more alone than ever. The driver occasionally glanced at her, his gaze sharp and suspicious. Zena felt like an outsider, caught in a situation she didn't belong in. Her thoughts drifted to her mother, who was probably awake and worried sick. Zena wanted to scream, to run, but fear kept her frozen. She couldn't understand how a night that had started with so much excitement had turned into a nightmare. Tears streamed down her face as regret weighed heavily on her heart. Morning came slowly, and the first rays of sunlight filtered through the broken windows. Zena hadn't slept at all, her mind too restless. Tund sat beside her, his head in his hands. I'm sorry, he finally said. I never wanted this to happen. Zena looked at him, anger and sadness mixing in her chest. Then why did you bring me? She asked softly. Tund sighed, struggling to find the words. I thought it would be fun. I didn't think it would get this bad, he admitted. Zena shook her head. This isn't fun. This is dangerous, Tund. I just want to go home, she said firmly. Tund nodded, but deep down, Zena wasn't sure if she could trust him anymore. As they sat in silence, the sound of footsteps echoed outside. Zena's heart leapt in fear. The driver motioned for everyone to be quiet, grabbing a metal rod for protection. Stay back, he whispered, his eyes scanning the door. Zena clung to Tund, her body trembling. The footsteps stopped, and a loud knock broke the silence. Open up! Police, a voice shouted. Zena's stomach dropped. The driver cursed under his breath, gesturing for them to hide. Tund pulled Zena behind an old cabinet, their breaths shallow as the knocks grew louder. Zena closed her eyes, praying they wouldn't be found. The police didn't wait long before forcing their way inside. The door creaked as it swung open, and heavy boots stomped across the dusty floor. Zena held her breath, her heart pounding so loudly she thought it would give them away. Search the place, one of the officers commanded. The sound of furniture being moved and objects being knocked over filled the room. Zena felt tears streaming down her face as fear gripped her. She wondered if this was the end for her. Would they arrest her? Would her mother ever forgive her for getting into this mess? The police eventually left, seemingly satisfied that no one was inside. Zena and Tund emerged from their hiding spot, shaken but relieved. The driver peeked out the window, muttering, "They'll be back. We need to move." Zena shook her head. "No, I'm not going anywhere. I'm done running," she said firmly. Tund looked at her with wide eyes. "Zena, you can't stay here. It's not safe," he pleaded. But Zena was resolute. "I didn't do anything wrong, Tund. I'm not like you and your friends. I'll explain everything to the police if I have to," she said. Her words left Tund speechless. Ignoring their protests, Zena walked out of the building, her steps steady despite her fear. She didn't know where she was going, but she was determined to find her way home. The sunlight felt warm on her skin, a stark contrast to the cold fear she had felt all night. Tund watched her go, torn between following her and staying with his friends. "You're making a mistake, Zena," he called out. But Zena didn't look back. She had made up her mind. She was done with the lies, the danger, and the regret. All she wanted was to return to her mother and the safety of her home. Zena walked quickly through the dense bushes, unsure of her direction but desperate to get away from the nightmare she had been trapped in. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made her jump. The fear of being caught by either the police or Tun's friends pushed her forward. The rising sun bathed the area in light, but her heart was still heavy with fear and regret. As she walked, Zena thought about her mother. She remembered how her mom always warned her to be careful about the people she trusted. A good name is better than riches, her mother would say. Zena wiped a tear from her cheek. If only she had listened. She whispered softly, "Please, God, help me find my way home." After what felt like hours of walking, Zena stumbled upon a narrow dirt road. Her heart lifted slightly, hoping it would lead her back to her village. Her feet ached, and her dress was torn and dirty, but she didn't care. She just wanted to be home. As she followed the road, the sound of a vehicle approached from behind. Panic surged through her. Was it the police? Or worse, the driver? She quickly hid behind a tree, her breathing shallow. A rusty pickup truck passed by, the driver oblivious to her presence. Relieved, Zena stepped back onto the road, determined to keep moving. Back in the village, Zena's mother paced the floor of their small home, her heart filled with worry. She had stayed up all night, waiting for Zena to return. Where could she be? She whispered, staring at the front door. Neighbors had come by earlier, offering to help look for her, but no one had found any sign of her. Zena's mother sank into a chair, clutching a small piece of fabric from Zena's dress that she had found on the ground near the market. "Please, bring my daughter back to me," she prayed aloud, tears streaming down her face. The village had begun to stir, and word of Zena's disappearance spread quickly. As Zena followed the road, she spotted a small hut in the distance. Smoke curled from the roof, and the smell of burning firewood filled the air. Her stomach growled loudly, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since the previous evening. She hesitated, unsure if it was safe to approach. A kind-looking elderly woman emerged from the hut, carrying a basket of vegetables. She noticed Zena standing by the road and called out, "My child, are you lost?" Zena hesitated but nodded, tears filling her eyes. The woman waved her over, her gentle smile providing a sliver of comfort. "Come in. Let's get you something to eat," she said. Inside the hut, Zena sat near the fire while the woman prepared a simple meal. The aroma of the steaming porridge filled the room, making Zena's stomach rumble louder. "Eat, my dear," the woman said, placing a bowl in front of her. Zena mumbled a quiet, "Thank you," before digging in. As Zena ate, the woman sat beside her, studying her face. "You've had a long night," she said softly. Zena nodded but didn't offer any details. The woman didn't press her, sensing that the girl needed time to gather her thoughts. "You're safe here. When you're ready, you can tell me what happened," the woman added. After resting for a while, Zena finally opened up to the elderly woman. She explained how she had followed Tun to the party, the chaos that unfolded, and her desperate attempt to return home. The woman listened quietly, her face filled with understanding and concern. "You're lucky, my child," the woman said when Zena finished. "Not everyone comes back from such situations unharmed." Zena nodded, guilt washing over her. "I just want to go home," she whispered. The woman patted her hand gently. "You will. I'll help you," she promised. The woman offered Zena fresh clothes to replace her torn dress. "These belong to my granddaughter," she said, handing Zena a simple but clean outfit. Zena thanked her, feeling a small sense of relief as she changed into the clothes. As they prepared to leave, the woman packed a small bundle of food for Zena. "You'll need this for the journey," she said. Zena felt a wave of gratitude. "Thank you, Ma. I don't know how to repay you," she said. The woman smiled warmly. "Just promise me you'll be more careful in the future," she replied. The woman led Zena to a nearby path that connected to the main village road. "Follow this, and you'll find your way home," she instructed. Zena hesitated, turning back to hug the woman tightly. "Thank you for everything," she said, her voice trembling. As Zena began her journey back, she felt a mix of emotions. Relief that she was closer to home, but fear of facing her mother's anger and disappointment. She knew she had to take responsibility for her actions, but the thought of seeing her mother again gave her the strength to keep going. When Zena finally reached the outskirts of her village, she paused, taking a deep breath. She could see the familiar rooftops in the distance. Her heart raced as she thought about how her mother would react. Would she be angry? Relieved? Zena didn't know what to expect. As she walked through the village, curious eyes followed her. Whispers spread quickly, "She's back. Where has she been?" Zena ignored the murmurs, focusing on getting home. Her feet felt heavy, but her determination to face the truth pushed her forward. Zena's mother was sitting outside their home when she saw her daughter approaching. She froze for a moment, then ran to Zena, pulling her into a tight embrace. "Zena, where have you been? I was so worried," she cried. Tears streamed down both their faces as Zena apologized over and over. "I'm so sorry, Mama. I should have listened to you," Zena sobbed. Her mother held her close, her relief outweighing her anger. "You're home now, and that's what matters," she said softly. For the first time in what felt like forever, Zena felt safe. She vowed never to let her curiosity or bad decisions lead her astray again. After the tears subsided, Zena sat with her mother in their small home. Her mother prepared a warm meal, but the silence between them felt heavy. Finally, Zena's mother spoke, her voice firm but gentle. "Zena, you must tell me everything that happened." Zena hesitated, but she knew she couldn't hide the truth any longer. As Zena recounted the events of the night, the party, the fight, the chase, her mother's face shifted between shock, anger, and sadness. "I warned you about Tund," her mother said, her voice trembling. "He brought danger into your life." Zena nodded, feeling the weight of her mistakes. "I'll never see him again, Mama. I promise," she said earnestly. In the days that followed, Zena avoided leaving the house. The whispers in the village were growing louder. Everyone seemed to have their own version of what happened, and none of them were kind. Zena's mother stood by her, defending her daughter whenever gossipers came too close. One morning, Zena overheard two women talking outside. "That girl was lucky to come back alive," one said. "But her reputation? Gone." The word stung, but Zena knew she couldn't change how people thought. She decided she would focus on proving herself through her actions, no matter how long it took. Zena's mother decided it was time for her daughter to regain some normalcy. "You can't hide forever," she said, handing Zena a basket of yams. "Go to the market and sell these. Keep your head high." Zena hesitated but knew her mother was right. At the market, Zena felt the weight of 100 eyes on her. People whispered as she walked past, but she focused on her task. A kind woman approached her stall and bought some yams. "It takes courage to show your face here," the woman said with a small smile. Zena felt a flicker of hope. Not everyone in the village judged her. Back at home, Zena told her mother about the woman at the market. Her mother smiled, placing a reassuring hand on Zena's shoulder. "You see? There are good people who will support you," she said. Zena nodded, feeling a bit stronger than before. That evening, Zena sat outside, watching the sun set over the village. She thought about her future and how she could rebuild her life. "Maybe I can start helping Mama more," she thought. The idea of earning back her mother's trust and the village's respect gave her a sense of purpose. One morning, Zena decided to visit the elderly woman who had helped her after the party. She wanted to thank her properly and let her know she was safe. Her mother supported the idea, saying it was important to show gratitude. Zena brought a small basket of fruits as a gift and walked to the hut where the woman lived. When she arrived, the woman welcomed her warmly. "I'm so glad to see you, my child," the woman said. They sat together, and Zena shared how her life had changed since returning to the village. The elderly woman listened to Zena's story with a kind smile. "You've been through so much, but you're stronger now," she said. Zena nodded, feeling a sense of peace in the woman's presence. The woman shared her own stories of hardship, teaching Zena that resilience was the key to overcoming challenges. Before Zena left, the woman gave her a small handmade bracelet. "This is a reminder of your strength," she said. Zena thanked her and promised to visit again. As she walked back to the village, she felt a newfound determination to move forward with her life. Back in the village, Zena focused on helping her mother with their farm and market business. She woke up early every day to fetch water, tend to crops, and prepare goods for the market. Her hard work didn't go unnoticed. Some villagers began to soften their attitudes toward her, seeing her dedication. One day, an elder in the village approached Zena. "You're showing great maturity," he said. "It's not easy to recover from such a scandal, but you're doing well." Zena felt a wave of gratitude. Each small step toward acceptance gave her hope. Tun's name was rarely mentioned in the village, but Zena still thought about him occasionally. She wondered if he regretted his actions or if he was still causing trouble elsewhere. Her mother warned her to focus on her own growth and not dwell on the past. One afternoon, while walking back from the market, Zena overheard a group of boys talking about Tund. "He got into trouble with the police again," one said. Zena felt a pang of sadness but reminded herself that she had chosen a different path. She whispered a silent prayer for him, hoping he would one day change. Months passed, and Zena began to feel like herself again. She had earned the trust of many villagers through her hard work and humility. One day, a woman approached her at the market, asking if Zena could help teach her daughter how to read. Zena was surprised, but agreed. Teaching the young girl became a source of joy for Zena. She realized she had a talent for helping others learn. Her confidence grew, and she started dreaming about becoming a teacher one day. The thought of building a positive future made her heart feel light. Zena's new role as a mentor to the village children brought her closer to the community. Parents began to respect her, and children looked up to her. Her mother beamed with pride, seeing how far her daughter had come. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Zena's mother spoke softly. "You've turned your mistakes into lessons, and I'm proud of you," she said. Zena smiled, tears in her eyes. She knew the road ahead would still have challenges, but she felt ready to face them with courage and grace. Months turned into a year, and Zena's life had transformed completely. The girl who had once followed Tund to a reckless party was now a role model in her village. Parents trusted her to teach their children, and elders praised her resilience. Still, Zena carried the lessons of that fateful night in her heart as a reminder to always think carefully about her choices. One day, while at the market, Zena saw a familiar face, one of the boys from the party. He looked startled to see her and quickly walked away, but Zena called out to him. "Wait," she said. The boy hesitated, then turned back. Zena didn't hold any anger. Instead, she asked him how he was doing and encouraged him to make better choices. The boy left the conversation looking thoughtful, and Zena felt good knowing she might have made a difference. Zena's relationship with her mother grew stronger than ever. Her mother often reminded her how proud she was, and they spent their evenings talking and laughing like they hadn't in years. One evening, her mother brought up an idea. "Zena, have you thought about going to school again? You have such a gift for teaching, you could learn more and help even more children." The thought excited Zena, but she knew they didn't have much money. "Mama, we can't afford that," she said. Her mother smiled knowingly. "Let's see what we can do. You've shown the village your worth, maybe they will support you." Zena felt a spark of hope. The idea of furthering her education filled her with determination. The next day, Zena and her mother visited the village elders to discuss the possibility of Zena going back to school. Zena was nervous, but her mother encouraged her to speak confidently. As Zena explained her dreams and how she wanted to give back to the village, the elders listened intently. One of the elders, an older woman with kind eyes, spoke up. You have shown great growth, Zena. We will see if we can arrange a scholarship for you. Zena's heart soared. She thanked the elders profusely, tears of gratitude streaming down her face. The possibility of returning to school felt like a second chance at life. A few weeks later, Zena received the news she had been hoping for. The village council had approved her scholarship. She would be attending a nearby school to continue her education. The villagers gathered to celebrate her achievement, and Zena felt overwhelmed by their support. As she prepared for her new journey, Zena promised herself that she wouldn't let them down. She packed her few belongings and hugged her mother tightly. "I'll make you proud, Mama," she said. Her mother smiled, tears in her eyes. "You already have, my child." At school, Zena faced new challenges. Many of her classmates came from wealthier families and had access to resources she didn't. But Zena was determined to work hard and prove herself. She spent her evenings studying and asking questions in class, quickly becoming one of the most diligent students. Her teachers noticed her dedication and often praised her in front of the class. One teacher, in particular, took a special interest in Zena. "You have a natural talent for learning," he said. "Have you ever thought about becoming a teacher yourself?" Zena smiled, knowing that was exactly what she wanted to do. Back in the village, Zena's absence was felt, but her mother kept everyone updated on her progress. The villagers were proud of her and often spoke of how far she had come. Her story became an example for other young girls, teaching them the importance of making wise choices and working hard. One day, Zena returned to the village during a school break. The children flocked to her, excited to hear about her experiences. She spent hours sharing stories and encouraging them to dream big. The joy on their faces reminded Zena why she had started this journey in the first place. As Zena continued her education, she began to think about ways to give back to her village. She wanted to create opportunities for other children who didn't have access to school. During one of her visits home, she shared her ideas with her mother. "You've always been a giver, Zena," her mother said. "If anyone can make this happen, it's you." Zena decided to start small, teaching reading and writing to the younger children in her village during her school breaks. The children loved her lessons, and their parents were grateful for her efforts. Zena's dream of becoming a teacher became a reality when she graduated at the top of her class. Her teachers and classmates celebrated her achievements, and she felt a deep sense of pride. But Zena knew her journey wasn't over. She wanted to return to her village and make a difference. When she arrived home, the entire village gathered to welcome her. The elders praised her determination, and the children cheered excitedly. Zena felt a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced in years. She knew she was finally ready to fulfill her purpose. With the help of the village council, Zena started a small school in her community. It wasn't fancy, but it was a place where children could learn and dream. Zena poured her heart into teaching, using her own experiences to inspire her students. The village flourished under Zena's guidance. Parents became more involved in their children's education, and the children's enthusiasm for learning grew. Zena's mother often visited the school, watching proudly as her daughter transformed the lives of others. Years later, Zena stood before her students, now grown and successful in their own right. Some had become doctors, teachers, and business owners, all thanks to the opportunities she had given them. Zena's heart swelled with pride as she realized the impact of her choices. As the village celebrated her achievements, Zena reflected on her journey, from the reckless girl who followed Tund to the wise woman she had become. Her story was a testament to the power of resilience and redemption. And as she looked at the bright faces of the next generation, she knew the future was in good hands.